My parents canceled my birthday because I landed a role in a major commercial and they screamed, "You'll bring shame with your acting dreams." They told the agency I was a minor. When I found out, I asked, "Why sabotage me?" My mom said, "We're saving you from yourself." But the agency sued for breach of contract. My 16th birthday was supposed to be a day of celebration. Nothing extravagant, just a small gathering with a cake, some friends, and maybe one of those awkward, overly sentimental birthday cards from my grandma. Instead, I spent the day trapped in my room, listening to my parents argue downstairs, their voices sharp and angry, slicing through the walls like knives. It had all started that morning. I had woken up early, heart pounding with excitement, because today wasn't just my birthday. It was the day I was finally going to tell my parents about the commercial. A few months ago, I had secretly auditioned for a national sports brand commercial after a talent scout noticed me in a community theater play. I hadn't expected anything to come of it, but against all odds, I got the part. I was going to be on TV, a real paid actor with an actual contract. It wasn't a movie or a big show, but it was a start. And for someone like me, who had spent years dreaming about acting, it meant everything. I thought they'd be proud. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the thing that finally made them see that acting wasn't just a phase. I had never been more wrong in my life. When I told them, my mother went still for a long moment, her hands tightening around the edge of the kitchen counter. Then she laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You're joking," she said flatly. I shook my head, still grinning, not realizing the storm that was about to hit. "I'm serious. It's a national commercial. I already signed a contract. You what?" My dad's chair scraped back so hard that it nearly tipped over. His face darkened. "You signed something without talking to us." Well, yeah, I stammered. Are you out of your mind, Corbin?" My mom's voice rose sharply. "You don't just sign things. God, this is exactly why we don't let you make decisions on your own." "It's an acting job," I said, my excitement rapidly fading. "It's not like I signed up for the military." "It might as well be," my dad snapped. "Do you even understand what you've done? Acting? That's not a career, Corbin. It's a joke, a waste of time. And now you've gone and embarrassed us by getting involved in something so shameful." Shameful. The word hit me like a slap to the face. Shameful. My voice cracked. "Are you serious? It's just a commercial. It's a public embarrassment," my mom hissed. "Do you know what people will say when they see you on TV, acting like a clown? You'll be a joke, a failure, and we'll be the parents who let our son throw his future away on some stupid fantasy." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just disapproval. This was hatred. "You're overreacting." I tried, my hands shaking. "It's one commercial, that's all. And I already signed a contract." "You are a minor," my dad interrupted coldly. "You can't sign anything without our permission. And we're not giving it." I stared at them, my heart pounding. "What are you saying?" "We already called the agency," my mom said, folding her arms. "Told them there was a misunderstanding. You're underage. The contract is void." The air left my lungs. I felt like I had just been punched in the gut. You call them?" I whispered. "We're saving you from yourself," she said simply. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My mind couldn't process what had just happened. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, like everything I had worked for, everything I had hoped for, had been destroyed in a matter of seconds. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. "You sabotaged me," I finally said. She scoffed. "Sabotage. Don't be dramatic, Corbin. You should be thanking us. We just saved you from making the biggest mistake of your life." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, to break something, to make them understand how much they had just taken from me. But I never got the chance. Because 2 weeks later, we got a letter from the agency's legal team. They were suing us. The lawsuit hit like a BMB. My parents had thought that a simple phone call would erase everything. But that wasn't how contracts worked. The agency had already spent money on production, planning, and marketing, and they weren't about to just let it go. The letter was clear. We had breached the contract. We owed damages. A lot of damages. $50,000. I wasn't in the room when my dad opened the letter, but I heard it. The loud, furious curse. The slam of a fist against the table. "This is insane." I walked in to find both of them standing at the kitchen table, the paper trembling in my dad's hands. "What's going on?" I asked warily. My mother's head snapped up, her eyes burning with rage. "This is your fault." I flinched. "What?" "The agency," my dad said, his voice tight. "They're suing us for breach of contract." I blinked. For a second, the words didn't even make sense. Then it clicked. "But you're the ones who canceled it," I said slowly. "You shouldn't have signed it in the first place," my mom snapped. For the next few weeks, the house was a battlefield. My parents fought constantly, sometimes with each other, but mostly with me. "You did this," my dad muttered one night as he passed me in the hallway. I stared after him, my hands clenched into fists. I wanted to scream that it was their fault, not mine, that they were the ones who had ruined everything. But I knew it wouldn't matter. They had already decided that I was the villain in this story. I don't know when I stopped feeling like their son. Maybe it was the moment they called the agency behind my back. Maybe it was the moment they looked at me like I was a burden, not a person. Maybe it was the night I found out they had stolen my savings. I had been working part-time jobs since I was 14, saving every cent I could for when I finally got out of this house. It wasn't a lot, but it was mine. Or at least, it had been. Until I checked my bank account one night and saw that most of it was gone. I confronted them immediately. "You stole my money?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "We borrowed it," my mom corrected. "You had no right." I shouted. "It was for the family," my dad said. "And you live under this roof, which means your money is our money." I saw red. They had taken my dreams. Now they had taken my money. I was done. I was getting out. But I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to make sure they never control me again. So I did the one thing they never expected. I filed for emancipation. I didn't tell them right away. I knew if I did, they'd do everything in their power to stop me. So instead, I started planning. Every night, after my parents went to bed, I sat in front of my laptop, researching everything I could about emancipation. It wasn't as simple as just walking into a courtroom and declaring myself free. I had to prove that I was capable of living on my own, that I had financial stability, a plan, and a legitimate reason for wanting to separate from my parents. The good news? They had given me plenty of reasons. I collected everything: texts, emails, even a recording of them admitting to stealing my savings. I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in family law, and after hearing my story, she agreed to represent me pro bono. The hardest part was finding a place to stay. I couldn't just show up in court and tell the judge I'd figure it out after I was legally independent. I needed a real, stable living situation. That's when I called my Aunt Valerie. She was my mom's older sister and the black sheep of the family. She had left home young, lived on her own terms, and had spent years fighting with my mom over, well, everything. I hadn't spoken to her much growing up, but I knew one thing. She hated the way my parents treated me. So I called her. At first, she didn't pick up. Then, a few minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Corbin." "Hey, Aunt Val," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need your help." There was a pause. Then, her voice softened. "Tell me everything." I did. I told her about the commercial, the lawsuit, the stolen money. All of it. She listened without interrupting, and when I finally finished, she let out a slow, controlled breath. "Those bastards," she muttered. I swallowed. I don't know where else to go." "You're coming here," she said immediately. I blinked. "Wait, really?" "Of course," she scoffed. "I should have taken you years ago. Your parents have always been controlling, but this is a Bessie, Corbin. Pack a bag. I'll book you a bus ticket." My throat tightened. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of relief. "Thank you," I whispered. She exhaled. "Don't thank me yet. We still have a fight ahead of us." I knew she was right. But for the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. I didn't leave right away. I needed to be careful. If my parents found out I was planning to leave, they'd lock me in that house. So I kept my head down. I acted normal. I did my chores, stayed quiet at dinner, pretended to be defeated. Meanwhile, Aunt Valerie was working behind the scenes. She hired a second lawyer to help with the paperwork. She pulled together proof of my parents' financial abessi. And most importantly, she helped me figure out a way to survive on my own. Between my savings, what little was left of it, the job I'd lined up, and the money Aunt Val was willing to help with, I had just enough to make my case in court. Then, 3 weeks later, I made my move. It was late. My parents were asleep. I'd already packed a small bag, clothes, my laptop, the legal documents my lawyer had sent me. I wasn't scared. I was ready. I slipped out of the house, my heart pounding. My bus ticket was already booked, my destination set. Aunt Valerie was waiting for me on the other end. I was finally leaving. The night air was sharp and cold as I walked down the street, my bag slung over my shoulder. I had rehearsed this moment in my head so many times, but now that I was actually doing it, my hands felt clammy, my heartbeat loud in my ears. I kept my head down, moving quickly toward the bus station. It wasn't far, just a 15-minute walk, but every shadow, every distant car engine made me tense. I half expected my dad's truck to come screeching around the corner, my mother to come storming out of the house, screaming my name. But nothing happened. When I reached the station, the waiting area was mostly empty, save for an old man snoring in the corner and a woman scrolling through her phone. The digital sign overhead flickered. 11:45 p.m., New Orleans, Louisiana, that was me. Aunt Valerie lived just outside the city, in a town called Metairie. I had only been there once, years ago, but I remembered liking it. It was warm, full of life, so different from the suffocating little suburb where I had spent my entire childhood. I sat down on the plastic bench, exhaling slowly. I did it. I got out. A wave of emotions crashed into me all at once. Relief, excitement, fear. But more than anything, I felt free. At least until my phone rang. I stiffened, pulling out of my pocket. Mom, I let it ring. Then Dad called. Then Mom again. Finally, a text came through. "Huh? Where are you?" Then another. "Dad, get home now." I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering. How did they know? Then I remembered Tessa. I had told her I was leaving. She had promised not to say anything, but maybe she had panicked. Maybe they had noticed I was gone and pressured her into talking. Another message popped up. MOM. If you don't come back, you will regret it. I swallowed. Then, a message from Tessa. Tessa, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to tell them. I swear. They figured it out and I'm sorry, Corbin. Please be safe. I clenched my jaw, shoving my phone back into my pocket. It wasn't her fault. The loud hiss of the bus brakes jolted me from my thoughts. The doors opened, and the driver gave me a nod. Head into New Orleans? I nodded. Ticket. I fumbled for my phone, pulling up the digital ticket Aunt Val had sent me. He scanned it, then waved me on board. As I climbed the steps, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. Dad, if you get on that bus, don't bother coming back. I hesitated for half a second. Not because I was reconsidering. I wasn't, but because the weight of it finally hit me. This was it. This was the moment I truly left. I exhaled, pocketed my phone, and stepped inside. The doors hissed shut behind me. The ride was long, but I barely slept. I kept my head against the window, watching the dark highways roll past, my thoughts spinning. Will my parents try to stop me in court? Would they show up to fight the emancipation? Or would they just let me go? Would Tessa be okay without me? Aunt Val had promised that if I won emancipation, she would help me get on my feet. I had some money, not much, thanks to my parents, but I had a plan. I would work, finish school, and once I was stable, I would start auditioning again. I wasn't giving up. No matter what happened next, I wasn't letting them KLL my dreams. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, the driver's voice was crackling over the speaker. New Orleans, last stop. I sat up groggily, rubbing my eyes. The bus pulled into the terminal, the city lights stretching out around me, warm and golden. Even in the early hours of the morning, the place felt alive. I grabbed my bag and stepped out into the humid air. And then I saw her. Aunt Valerie stood by the entrance, arms crossed, her red hair tied up in a messy bun. When she spotted me, she broke into a grin. "There's my runaway nephew," she said. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Hey, Aunt Val." She looked me up and down, then jerked her chin toward the parking lot. "Come on, let's get you home. We got a lot to do." I nodded and followed her to the car. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I had someone fighting for me. The drive to Aunt Valerie's house was quiet at first. I think she knew I was exhausted, not just from the trip, but from everything. I stared out the window as we passed through the empty streets, the city lights flickering in the distance. "You hungry?" she finally asked, her voice casual. I shook my head. "Liar," she said, smirking. "You're 16. Teenagers are always hungry." I exhaled a small laugh. She wasn't wrong. My stomach felt like it was eating itself, but food was the last thing on my mind. Aunt Val didn't push. She just nodded and kept driving. Her house was in Metairie, a quiet little suburb just outside of New Orleans. It wasn't big, but it felt warm, lived in. The kind of place where people actually like being home. There were plants on the windowsills, books stacked in corners, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. "All right," she said, tossing her keys onto the counter. "You're staying in the guest room. Bathroom's down the hall. Help yourself to anything in the fridge." I nodded, adjusting my bag on my shoulder. She studied me for a moment, then softened. "You're safe here, Corbin. You know that, right?" I swallowed. "Yeah, good." She clapped her hands together. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow, we start winning this thing." I slept like a rock. When I woke up the next morning, the smell of bacon and coffee drifted through the house. For a second, I forgot where I was. My brain expected to hear my mom banging around in the kitchen, my dad muttering about work. Then I remembered. I wasn't home. I sat up, running a hand through my hair. The clock on the nightstand read 9:32 a.m. Finally, Aunt Val called from the kitchen. I was about to check if you were still breathing. I pulled on a hoodie and made my way out, my legs still heavy with sleep. She was standing at the stove, flipping bacon with one hand and sipping coffee with the other. "Morning," I mumbled. "Morning, kid. You like your eggs scrambled or fried?" I blinked. No one had ever asked me that before. My mom just made them however she felt like it. And if I didn't like it, too bad. Scrambled," I said. She nodded and cracked an egg into the pan. "You up for a meeting today?" I frowned. "Meeting? Your lawyer. We need to get your paperwork moving. The sooner we file, the harder it'll be for your parents to pull anything." My stomach twisted. I knew this was coming, but now that it was actually happening, it felt real. Yeah, I said quietly. I'm ready. She shot me a look like she didn't totally believe me, but didn't push. Instead, she slid a plate of food in front of me. Eat first, she said. Fight later. The lawyer's office was small, but professional. I half expected some intimidating old guy in a suit, but instead, I met Cassie Langley, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 30s with dark brown curls and a stack of papers already waiting for me. Corbin, she greeted, shaking my hand firmly. I've read over everything you sent me. You've got a solid case. I exhaled. Yeah, yeah. She motioned for me to sit. But that doesn't mean it'll be easy. I figured. Nothing in my life ever was. Your parents might fight this, she continued. If they show up in court and argue that you're not ready to be independent, the judge could deny the petition. I swallowed. So what do I do? Show them that you are ready. Cassie pulled out a few forms and slid them toward me. First, we need to prove you can support yourself. You got a part-time job lined up good, but we need more. Proof of income, a budget plan, maybe even a GED program if you're not staying in high school. I nodded quickly. I'll get all of that. Second, she continued, we need character witnesses. People who can vouch that your parents have been neglectful or harmful to your well-being. My chest tightened. I don't know who would do that. My parents have everyone convinced they're perfect. Cassie tapped her pen against the desk. What about your friend Tessa? I hesitated. She kind of sold me out. Aunt Val arched an eyebrow. Willingly, I sighed. Not exactly. They pressured her. Cassie considered. She might still help. If we can get her to sign a statement about how they treat you, it could help convince the judge. I didn't like the idea of dragging Tessa into this. She wasn't the enemy, but I also knew Cassie was right. I'll talk to her, I said. Cassie nodded. Good. Last thing. Do you have any record of financial abscess? Anything that shows they took money from you? I pulled out my phone and opened my bank statements. They drained my savings account. Cassie leaned forward. Perfect. We'll add that to the petition. She started typing rapidly on her laptop while Aunt Val patted my shoulder. See, she said, you're already kicking 8 dashed. I huffed out a weak laugh. We'll see. Cassie finished typing and turned the screen toward me. This is the official petition for emancipation. Once we file it, the court will set a hearing date. I read over the document carefully. My name, my parents' names, the reason for the petition, the evidence attached. At the bottom was a blank space for my signature. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the pen. This was it, the moment I officially started cutting them out of my life. I pressed the pen to paper and signed my name. Cassie smiled. All right, Corbin, you just made the first move. Aunt Val grinned. Now, let's make sure you win. That night, I texted Tessa. Hey, can we talk? A few minutes passed. Then, Tessa, I guess. What's up? Me. I need your help. She didn't answer right away. I stared at the screen, waiting, my heart pounding. Then, finally, Tessa, I don't know, Corbin. They're really mad. Me, I know. But you know what they've done to me. I just need you to tell the truth. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, Tessa, if I do this, they'll hate me. I swallowed hard. Yeah, they will. I could feel the weight of it through the screen. Tessa had been my best friend since we were kids. But now, she had a choice to make. Finally, her next message appeared. Tessa, okay, tell me what to do. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time I had a real chance. The weeks leading up to the hearing were the most stressful of my life. I spent every day preparing, getting paperwork in order, making sure my part-time job was secure, and working on a budget plan with Aunt Valerie. Cassie coached me on what to say in court, how to present myself, and what to expect if my parents decided to fight back. And of course, there was Tessa. She kept her word. We met at a coffee shop one afternoon, and she looked wrecked, dark circles under her eyes, fingers twisting in her sleeves. She wouldn't even look me in the eye at first. I feel like a terrible person, she mumbled. I sighed. Tessa, you didn't mean to tell them. And you're helping me now. That's what matters. She bit her lip, then slid a folded paper across the table. I wrote down everything I could remember. Every time they insulted you, controlled you, made you feel like garbage. And I'll testify if I have to. I stared at the paper, something tight forming in my throat. You don't have to do this, I said quietly. They're going to turn on you the second they find out. She let out a shaky breath. I know, but I'm tired of pretending they're good people. You deserve to get out, Corbin. I gripped the paper and nodded. Thank you. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The court date arrived faster than I was ready for. The morning of the hearing, I sat in Cassie's car outside the courthouse, my hands clammy against my jeans. Aunt Val was next to me, radiating calm, but I could feel the tension under her easy expression. You good, kid? She asked. I nodded, but I was lying. Cassie turned to her seat. Remember, Corbin, this judge isn't looking for a sob story. They need proof that you're responsible and that your parents are unfit guardians. Stick to the facts. Stay calm. And no matter what, don't lose your temper. I swallowed hard. Got it. She gave me an approving nod. Let's go win this thing. Walking into the courtroom, I felt like I was suffocating. My parents were already there. My mother sat stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin line, while my dad had his arms crossed, his face unreadable. They glared at Aunt Valerie when we entered. But the real surprise? They had a lawyer. Cassie muttered a curse under her breath as she spotted the man in the navy blue suit sitting beside them. So they're fighting this, Aunt Val murmured. Cassie nodded. They're going to argue that Corbin isn't ready to be on his own, that he's being manipulated by you. I exhaled slowly. Then we proved them wrong. The hearing started. Cassie presented our case with the kind of confidence that made me believe we had already won. She laid out the stolen money, the emotional abesi, the way they sabotaged my career, and my clear plan for independence. Then, my parents' lawyer took his turn. This is just teenage rebellion, he said smoothly. Corbin's parents only wanted what was best for him. He's young, impulsive, and easily influenced. He's throwing away his future over a childish dream of fame. I clenched my fists under the table, but I forced myself to stay calm. Then came the witnesses. Aunt Valerie spoke first. She told the judge about the controlling behavior, the way they belittled me, the way they drained my bank account without permission. Then Tessa took the stand. My mom's face twisted when she saw her. My dad tensed. They hadn't expected this. Tessa took a shaky breath, then spoke. I've known Corbin since we were kids, she said, and I've seen how his parents treat him. They don't support him, they don't listen to him, and when he finally had a chance to do something for himself, they took it away. She hesitated, then continued, her voice stronger. They stole his money. They called his dreams an embarrassment. They've controlled every part of his life, and now they're trying to stop him from leaving. Not because they love him, but because they love power. My mom shot up from her seat. That's a lie, she hissed. We gave that girl everything, and this is how she repays us. The judge banged the gavel, frowning. Mrs. Hayward, sit down. Another outburst like that, and I'll have you removed from the courtroom. I swallowed. This was working. After all the testimonies, the judge took a long pause. He shuffled the papers, adjusted his glasses, then looked me straight in the eye. Corbin Hayward, he said, his voice measured. You have presented a compelling case for emancipation. Given the financial evidence, the testimony of multiple witnesses, and the clear intent of your parents to control and manipulate your future, I find sufficient grounds to approve your petition. I stopped breathing. The court grants your emancipation, the judge declared. You are now a legal adult. Aunt Val grabbed my hand under the table. Cassie smirked. My mom made a strangled noise, half gasp, half scream. My dad stood up abruptly and walked out without a word. It was over. I won. I didn't look at my parents as I left the courthouse. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked out into the sunlight, feeling lighter than I ever had before. Aunt Valerie threw an arm around my shoulders, squeezing tight. You did it, kid, she murmured. Cassie grinned. So what's next for you, Corbin? I smiled. I'm going to rebuild my life. And then, I'm getting my dreams back. A year after I won my freedom, I booked my first real acting job. It wasn't just a commercial this time. It was a recurring role on a TV show. The kind of job that would have made my parents furious. The kind of job they told me I would never get. And the best part? The contract required parental signatures for minors. But I wasn't a minor anymore. So when the casting director slid the paperwork across the table and asked, "Do you need a guardian to sign?" I grinned, picked up the pen, and said, "Nope, I've got this." And I signed for myself. I won.